Welcome, Ms. McKay, to our interview for CSFO.
Thank you.
We obviously know you, so it's good to see you here. We're so pleased you applied along with the other two candidates. We're continuing a public meeting that we started earlier today. Ms. Madonna, to your far right, has done all the work, and I mean work, to get the interviews lined up, information to the board. So I'm going to pass that responsibility to Amy to conduct the questions.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Just a quick overview of what the process will be. We will open it up, ask you to give a short little opening statement, just a little introduction about yourself and your background or whatever you want to say. We'll try to limit that to a little under 5 minutes just to keep things flowing. Then I will ask the first question and we'll just go down the row and everybody will ask a question and then we'll swing back around and do it again. We'll try not to spend too much time on each question. If it kind of seems like it's going long, I'll kind of stop it. But just because we have quite a few questions, we want to get all of those in. At the end, if you have any, feel free to take notes. If you have any questions, need clarification, feel free to speak up. And then we'll try to leave a little time at the end for you to ask any questions that you might have, or give us a little closing statement, and, finish things up. So we will then start by giving you the floor.
My name is Michelle McKay. I am very excited to be here and have this opportunity to talk to each of you. I am actually a resident of Hoover. I have gone through the Hoover school system. My children have gone through the Hoover school system, and I have been an employee here for 17 plus years. I absolutely love the work ethic and the dedication that I see among my peers and the board, which is one of the reasons why I want to be here and be a part of this group in a continuing position. I have had the pleasure of working very closely with 3 different CSFOs. They have all had different working ethics, working methods, communication skills, but the one thing that's very common, they always included me in everything that they did. I was always a part of committee meetings, communications. They always made me feel very welcome. They were very good teachers. They were very open-minded and listened to any ideas. And I would like to continue in that same realm as a CSFO for Hoover City Schools. I am very dedicated. I am very hardworking. I am fair and honest. I believe that I give 110% and will continue to do so, but I'm here to also help the board, help all the stakeholders of Hoover to make education an excellent avenue for our children and our teachers and administrators and our support staff to be successful. So whatever tools it requires to do that, I want to be able to help them with that.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll get started. So I will ask the first question. So what do you see as the most important role of the CSFO, and how has your previous experience prepared you to be successful as a CSFO for Hoover City Schools?
Okay. I believe the most important role for the CSFO is to be a service provider. I am a servant to all of the stakeholders. My stakeholders are the superintendent, and it's my role to make sure that she has the information that she needs to make accurate, decisive decisions that are in the best interest of the school district. And understanding that it's in the best interest of the school district and maybe not one individual or one particular school. So it is very important that I give her timely and accurate information. I believe that it's very important that I work with the board and that I provide them again with accurate and timely information, because they also make decisions. They make decisions on policies, but they also have to make decisions on education, personnel, facilities, and the finances of the district. So it's important that I provide them with accurate information. I am also a provider for our local school principals. I've got to make sure that they have the resources that they need in order to be successful and provide academic excellence for our students. And that goes the same for our teachers and our support staff. I need to make sure that we provide them with professional development and training to be successful in the classroom. So it's my responsibility to make sure that we have the assets available to do that, but that we also manage our funds fiscally. As far as my experience, I have an audit background. I have written financial statements, I have written management letters, I have audited internal controls. And basically what you do when you audit an internal control is you make sure that the assets are secure, that there is no risk of loss to those assets. I have been the secretary to the director of school services, and a lot of that part of my job was writing bids, bid tabulations, working on capital projects, because at that time we were building new schools. I think I was a part of the Spain Park High School, River Chase Elementary School, those are just to name a few. But you started from the ground up. I worked with architects and engineers. We ordered the inventory in the building, the furniture and fixtures. I also managed the inventory and did enrollment. At that point in time, we were responsible for projections for enrollment. And I went through one of our first very difficult rezonings that I learned a lot from that experience. From there, I went to the liaison between local schools and the central office, and I did financial statements. I did the budgeting for the 2 high schools. I did inventory for the 2 high schools. And then I moved into the management role, the director of accounting. And there I worked very, very closely with the CSFO. Together we do the budgeting, we do the monthly financial statements. I'll prepare the financial statements. The individual that was the CSFO would do the dashboard and the memos and things like that. So we worked very well together, and I believe that needs to continue. So I have had a lot of experience with bids, reviewing contracts. As the interim CSFO, I'm now reviewing contracts. I'm learning a lot there. So I do have a lot of experience in the roles of the CSFO. As far as bids, I've actually written landscape bids, band equipment bids, and we're currently writing bids for field lighting and for the painting this summer. And all of this can't take place with just me. It's collaboration with many, many different people and departments. And you need to understand that too. It's not a me show. It takes a lot of people and teamwork to make it possible. But I have been very, very lucky, again, to be a part of all of the aspects of the financial world. And I've been interim CSFO twice. And again, it's an honor and humbling, but I think I'm ready to take that next step and become a CSFO. My children are grown, they've moved out. I'm ready to spread my wings and have new challenges. So here I am.
All right, thank you.
Ms. McKay,
Yes.
thank you again for your submitting your name and applying for our job. Can you describe your understanding of the governance and administrative structure of a school system?
I'll do my best.
All right.
I believe the superintendent is the leader of the district. She is the one that sets the tone. She is the one that is responsible for ensuring that policies and procedures are adhered to. She does report to the Board of Education. The board is appointed by our city council. The board is responsible for making policy and reviewing, as I stated earlier, the financials, personnel reports, any changes, new construction, old construction, renovations, repairs to our facilities. They actually approve those contracts. They are responsible for hiring and evaluating the superintendent and the CSFO. Going back to the superintendent is the spokesperson for the district. She is responsible for training, professional development for the administrators. She is also responsible for the principals and evaluating their staff and making sure that staff is meeting the standards and objectives of the district. So a very important role. The principals and the local school administrators, they're responsible again for monitoring the teachers and ensuring that we are following educational standards and objectives.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. McKay,
Yes.
if you were hired, and I know this might be a super easy question being the interim, but what do you think would be your biggest challenge in your first year with this system?
I will say I feel proficient in many areas. I can be dangerous in other areas, and I think if we ask that question, I can go into more detail. I think my biggest challenge, honestly, will have to be payroll reporting. Hoover City Schools is so large that you just get a piece of the payroll pie. As far as budgeting personnel and things like that, I've been a part of that. I have not been a part in any of my experiences with actually filing appropriate tax returns. So there's a lot that I would like to work with our payroll department. And communication is key, but I would like to shadow for a little while and just get that experience, because I think I need to have an idea of the full role. And if for some reason someone is absent and unable to process payroll, I think it's very important that our employees be paid timely. So I just want to see how that works in the background. You have a general idea and you go to classes, and I've been certified in payroll certification through ASBO, but the true hands-on, I'd like to be able to observe that. So I think that would be my greatest challenge, if you want to say challenge.
So following up, so you think,
Yes.
other than that, you think you probably had your hand on the way a lot of things
I
work,
honestly
right?
do,
Okay,
absolutely,
perfect.
yes, I do. Good morning. Good morning.
So describe your experience in assisting and or performing a year-end close, including the preparation of annual financial statements.
All right. I have experience with that as an auditor. I have experienced that as the liaison between the local schools and the central office. It was my responsibility to actually prepare the budget at the end of the year to make sure all journal entries had been appropriately made, that we were always in alliance with the budget. If we weren't, then I needed to communicate that. So a lot of documentation at the end of the year. In the role that I'm in now, I prepare the financial statements, I prepare the budget, I do the desk review for the state. I prepare the work papers for the auditors. There are a lot of journal entries that need to be made at year end. Investment interest, allocating utilities and materials between transportation and operations, because they're in the same building. So there are a lot of things that you have to do at year end that maybe some districts don't have the opportunity to do or do not have to do. So I have to say, from the beginning to the end, it's a lengthy process. You start in September, our books are open in October, so you have to make sure that every transaction that's taking place is in the appropriate period. So there's a lot of monitoring and managing and supervising at the local school level and the central office level. So you just want to make sure that everything's allocated and appropriated in the right period. So there's a lot that takes place at the end of September and October. And our auditors, we have to have everything ready to go by November 1, because our auditors are here the first week of November. So it's very time consuming, but it's your monthly procedures. It really is. At the end of the year, at fiscal end close, you're just really managing the money in the proper period.
Mr. Kay, describes your knowledge of the Alabama bid law, and I realize that's a big question, but just generally the Alabama bid law, you understand?
Okay. The Alabama bid law has several parts. There are several exceptions, and I don't know how much detail you want, but I'll tell you in a quick flash what I can. So the Alabama bid law is a competitive bid law. If you purchase services or buy materials and equipment equal to or greater than $15,000, you're required to go through the competitive bid process. And what that means is you have sealed bids. You open them at a specified time. There are certain procedures that you have to go through. There are exceptions to the bid law, and that would be purchase services such as attorneys, architects, engineers. It also includes insurance. So those things you do not have to bid. But I think the most important thing to share with most people, and they don't understand, is that it's not just a one-time purchase, and it's not just purchases at one particular school. The important thing to know is it's in the aggregate and it's district-wide. And that's sometimes very hard to get people to focus on, because when they make that purchase, they're not thinking, you know what, I need to call the central office to make sure that district-wide we're not buying TVs to put up throughout the hallways for our students and our parents that's in excess of $15,000. So it's my responsibility as a CSFO, or in my current role, to make sure that schools understand that. And we start with our bookkeepers in training, we start with our support organizations in training, and we start with our principals in training. The other piece to the bid law would be the public works bid law. And that is for projects that are greater than $50,000. That could be renovation project, repair project, new projects, but projects greater than $50,000. There are some exceptions to that as well. If there's an emergency, then you are not required to do advertising. So there are different pieces to each of those pies. Other exceptions could be if there's one bidder, if there's a sole source. Federal programs, they have different guidelines that you have to follow. So when we talk about 15,000 and 50,000, it's actually different for federal programs. So there are a lot of different things that you have to be aware of in this role, and we don't always know it off the top of our head. There are times I have to go to the book and look to see what those guidelines are, but you know enough to start questioning and looking into it, doing some research. Did I answer all of that question?
You do. I
Okay.
really have
Okay.
I think you've been briefed kind of on the question. There was a word left out. Hypothetically,
Okay.
and you know that Hoover and Spain Park both have girls softball and they have boys baseball. So
Yes.
in fairness, the same question to each applicant. Hypothetically, a booster club is offered to donate $100,000 to rebuild a baseball field. You find out that your employees can spend $60,000 for public works labor and also contribute to that, rather than going outside to use the labor to build a facility. What concerns would you have about receiving the money? You've already mentioned you understand public works. What would some questions need to be asked before you could even receive it and use that money?
First of all, if anyone in our district receives a donation of $1,000 or more, they're required to communicate with the CSFO before those funds are received and deposited. And basically what we look at is, are those funds non-public or public? Are they allowable or unallowable in the way that they've been presented for use? Is there any type of conflict of interest? Are they expecting any exclusive rights or anything in return? We also look to see if it could be a violation of state or federal laws, such as the Alabama Ethics Law or Title IX. So in this instance, and I didn't know all the specifics, in this instance, it's $100,000. And even though we have employees that are willing to do the work, it's still considered a public works project, and it still falls under the competitive bid law, because there will obviously be materials and equipment purchased over the $15,000 limit. So we would have to take a look at that. Now, if it's 100% non-public funds, then that competitive bid piece can go away. But you have to ensure that it's going to be $100,000 and no more, and there won't be any commingling of public and non-public. And I think that's very important. As far as Title IX, the Title IX law basically is for the equity of boys and girls in educational institutions that receive federal funds. So because because Hoover receives federal funds, we fall under that Title IX. And what we would have to do is look to see, I think this time you said that it's for baseball specifically.
You've already answered it with a Title IX, so that's why I
Okay.
made sure.
Okay.
Wouldn't football.
You didn't want more information.
No, no.
All right, but there are two things that you can do. You can either accept the donation and then find another donor, or the district supply funds to make sure that it's equitable, or you can deny the donation.
Can I follow up on that, Mr. Chairman?
No follow-up.
Under this hypothetical, and the money comes to you, which one, if any, of our stakeholders would you notify about the donation, and what would be your analysis about getting the answers to be sure that we were in compliance?
I have an understanding of the public and non-public laws. I have an understanding of what's allowable and not allowable. As far as whether we've received approval from our superintendent, which is very important. So a good question, thank you, I didn't bring that up. It's very important that before there's any land improvements or projects on school property, that you have to have the superintendent's approval. And we also, in our office, recommend that they talk to our director of operations. It's very, very important that he be involved in that as well. So yes, in something this large, I would definitely have to reach out to our superintendent and the director of school services, where smaller donations, I typically do not reach out to the superintendent.
Very good.
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, you get to ask a question too? Okay,
Okay,
I was thinking 10 times 2. Okay.
Glad you're at the table.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
For stepping up. Of course, the position that you applied for is going to require you to represent the school district. And it's gonna require that you interface with lots of groups and individuals, everyone from superintendent to board, out with principals, out with community leaders, business leaders, you name it. You'll be interfacing with those individuals. Talk to us about what experiences you've already had working with different contingencies of people. Talk about that experience and how you would be our representative and how you do interface with various groups.
As auditor and as the liaison with our local schools, I've had opportunities to sit down and review financial statements and to review the study of internal controls. So I've had experience talking to principals. Basically, when you're talking to the principals, here's the money that you have for you to spend. Here are those funds that are restricted. And when you have those funds that are discretionary to you, here are the ways that you can use them, and probably the criteria you need to go through before you choose how to spend those funds. Meaning, don't use your discretionary money when rental income is more restricted. I've had opportunities to meet and work with city leaders. Actually, we're in the process of meeting about equipment at the Hoover Met. So I've worked with our city leaders in negotiating and working through, again, sharing our resources. We did recently talk about facility use from the district perspective as well as from the city's perspective of all of the properties. I've had opportunities again to present to the board and work with the superintendent. I have presented to our ASBO group. It's a certification group that certifies CSFOs and local school bookkeepers and payroll directors. I actually presented Friday, no, gosh, one day this week. I'm so sorry, it's just gone by, but I've actually presented local school bookkeepers. I do the training for local school bookkeepers across the state as well as one of my colleagues here in the building. We also are presenting at the annual conference. I have 2 classes that I'm presenting in a few weeks in Perdido. So I have experience with my colleagues, not just administrators and the board. I also used to present to our support organizations, do a financial training for them as well to ensure that they know what deposit procedures are and assist them with the budgeting process. We would have special classes where we talked about budgets and we also talked about bylaws and the importance of bylaws. I've served or co-led committees with our community when we talked about the facility use, but then also when we talk about salary schedules and supplemental schedules, we pulled everybody in and had a collaborative effort with staff and administrators from across the district. So I feel like I have a good rapport and good communication skills, and I'm not afraid to do presentations. I think strong relationships.
Back around to me. So I have a background in data analysis. I'm very interested in that. So I'm interested to know what type of analysis would you perform to determine the financial health or condition of the school system as a whole?
I think there are several things that I would look at when evaluating a school district. The very first thing I would do is go to the financial statements. I would look at the audited financial statements specifically and see if there are any concerns of the auditors regarding accounting or internal controls, the maintenance of the finances. The other things that you can do, you can review media coverage. You learn a lot from the media. You learn if there have been staff reductions, reductions in force, if there are going to be reductions in tax receipts. So I think media coverage is important. I think looking at enrollment trends and staffing trends. I think looking at state allocations is also very important. Looking at the debt, looking at revenues. Have they been steady? Are they declining? Or are they rising? And at what rate are they doing one or the other? I think it's important to look at your cash on hand, your month's reserve. And when I say that, sometimes you'll see that school districts are asset rich, but not cash rich. And I think there's a difference between the two, and that's also very important. So those would be some of the areas that I would look at to see the health of a particular district.
Thank you.
It's me again.
Okay.
Can you talk to us about your experience in developing, implementing, and evaluating the school system's budget and ongoing fiscal management? And I'm really wanting you to give me some concrete examples of, you know, the budget of our size with which you have experience.
Okay. Our current budget is $177 million. $144 million of that is our general fund. 54% of that is local revenue. We have 240 local units. We have $168 million in debt. We have, I believe, 140 national board certified teachers, and all of that plays into the implementation of the budget. So let me go back to what the three things are that I'm supposed to talk about with the budget.
No. Talk to me how you want to talk about it.
Okay, so in developing the budget, it's teamwork. And teamwork involves not only the superintendent and the Board of Education as far as their capital plans and where they want to see the district go, but it's also our local schools and support organizations. So in March of every year, we typically start with our support organizations and doing the budget training. And we talk about the importance of wishes and needs of the school or the athletic program. And that communication is very important with those individuals. So we encourage them to have that communication with principals. Once the principals have that communication with the PTOs, the support organizations, the booster clubs, then they can determine what funds they're going to receive from the district and how they want to allocate those. They present their budget typically around June, and once we have their budget and I look at all of that and get that settled, then I move on to meeting with department heads. Now I've actually started meeting with some of our department heads to talk about funds that are left over this year and what we anticipate for next year. So as we talk through that, I will then give them a worksheet that shows the historical analysis of where funds have been spent, and then they can project for the current year. I'll then take all of that information and enter it into the system. But then I'm also responsible for going through not just the federal funds and funding sources, but the general fund. That's typically last. So you would budget all of your utilities and things like that at the very end and make sure everything's in balance. The communication is key, and working with other departments is very, very important. And then making sure that you're in line with your budget throughout the year. And we communicate with our department heads. We share financial reports monthly. And then anytime that they need a report during that month, they know they can come to us and we can do detailed reports any way that they want. But again, very important to be collaborative and teamwork.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mine's kind of twofold. How will you deal with a disagreement with the superintendent? And also, how would you deal if the superintendent and the board are telling you two different things to do? How would you deal with those things?
I think in the beginning I said my role, one of my roles, is to provide the superintendent with information to make decisions. And there may be times that I would like to advise, but I know ultimately the decision is not mine. She is looking at the big picture. She has to look at what's best for our district. And we may respectfully agree to disagree, but we will do it respectfully. And when I leave the boardroom, it will be a cohesion between the two of us. You have to show uniformity. And again, agree to disagree. And you can have those discussions behind closed doors, but I believe that's where it stays. As far as if I get conflicting feelings from the board, I think it's very important that, first of all, transparency is important and disseminating information is important. And I believe I need to include the board as well as the superintendent. So if I'm communicating with one body, I will communicate with both because I'm in a very difficult position. I'm hired by you, but I also have to support the superintendent. So it's a little bit difficult at times. So I think it's very important that when I'm communicating one, I'm communicating with both. And if there is a conflict, the best way to resolve it is to pull people to the table. And we've got to discuss what the differences are. And maybe it's just miscommunication. but discuss what those differences are, come to a decision, and again, leave with cohesion. We've got to make sure that we're all in public on the same page. I think that's very, very important.
May I ask a follow-up? Thank you for that response. So it would be helpful if you're ever asked for any information and or reports by the board, to ask the board to include the superintendent in that same email, so that everybody kind of knows this is something we're thinking about, looking at, talking about, or looking for information, so that this ends up being a three-party, all-engaged process, both by way of request and certainly by request of email.
Yes, ma'am.
If I'm following what you're
I do.
suggesting.
I truly believe that that is very, very important. Yes. Yes.
You good? Okay. We have 3 strong finalists for this position with different credentials and experience. So why should we select you?
I'm going to start with general. I truly believe academic excellence is worth the investment and commitment of financial resources, and I think that's most important. Again, as a graduate of the school system and children that graduated from the school system, it's important to me that when my kids go to a college class and the professors ask them, where did you go to school? And they say Hoover City Schools, the response has typically been, I should have known that. And I think I want every student to experience that. Again, whether they go to post-secondary education or they go to skilled trades, I want them to be able to walk out of here with academic excellence and the skills that they need to be successful. It's my responsibility to be transparent, accountable, and fiscally responsible, and I promise to do that. Again, I'm fair, honest, and dependable. I will bring 15 plus years of experience to the table. I have a strong work ethic. I believe I have clear and concise communication skills, which I think is very, very important for the position. And last but not least, I think I bring a passion for the job and my colleagues and the students of Hoover City Schools and the city in general. So I think my passion.
I know you know this, but I guess I'll learn something every time I get an answer. Describe your knowledge of local, state, and federal funding for school systems. Specifically, address your understanding of ad valorem tax assessments and factors that can cause fluctuation in value and thus influence the budget and the amounts. That's a long question.
It is a long question.
Basically-
I'm having it broken. I'm breaking it up
Okay.
here in my mind. So
You had it ahead of time, so.
no, well, I'm trying to break it up.
Sorry.
It's okay. So local revenues are typically derived from property and auto tax, city appropriations, and sales tax. Sales tax is typically a flat rate. Your property tax is typically based on an assessed value, and school systems are familiar with what we call a 1 mil. So 1 mil equals 1/10 of a cent, and I did my example, sometimes $1 on every $1,000. So I think that's an explanation of some of the local revenues. Your state revenues, those come from the Education Trust Fund. And basically, they provide salaries and benefits, textbooks, classroom instructional support money, which is the money that we send to the schools for the teachers to use in the classroom for technology, professional development, and library enhancement. That's typically based on your daily attendance, your students' daily attendance, or what we call ADM. And that's basically a year behind. So when you look at enrollment numbers, you always know you're 1 year behind. Your federal funds are restricted, and that's typically career tech funds, your Title I funds. It's CNP funds, but it's also your local school public funds that are included. As far as what determines property tax values, it's really supply and demand. It's based on the housing boom, it's based on interest rates, it's also based on industry and businesses. So in Hoover, Birmingham, we have a few large companies And should one of those companies close, then you'll have a lot of people that will move to other areas. That'll have a huge impact on funding for your school system, both on the local level, the state level, and the federal level. So it's very, very important to pay attention to, again, those trends.
And then that was my question was basically, it's an ongoing adjustment.
It
with
is.
the budget because,
Yes,
as you know, in this city, we've got some really nice commercial areas coming off current use, which I don't know how the CSFO's budgeting does it when you're getting paid in arrears, but you gotta look forward. You're looking out, I guess, 2 years if you look at that way, so, thank
sometimes I work in 3.
you.
Any additional? Did we have any additional questions that we wanted to ask? I know there was a
I'll
title.
be, in fairness, want to ask the same
Yeah.
questions, but the question before is, we have targeted Title I funds, and we use targeted funds by choice. We're not a Title I district, of course. So the question before is, we use, that I can see, our targeted funds in a very efficient way to reach all the schools where needed as a formula based on free and reduced. So if you want to elaborate on that, from what I see, it's a good system.
It is very good, but it's also the people you have in place.
Yeah.
And we've done a very good job to put people in place that have the knowledge and the interest in being successful and a love of children and their success. I think that's very, very important too. So we've been very, very beneficial to have people in place that monitor, manage, are fiscally responsible. I really don't have anything to add to that though.
Okay. Any additional thoughts or questions? David?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I want you to assume for me
Okay.
that you have the CSFO job. So that means there'll be a position vacated
Okay.
because
So-
you've been elevated, right?
Yes, sir.
That means you'll be in a position to hire someone to replace for your replacement.
Yes, sir.
Can you give us the analysis an analysis of how you would go about hiring, and would diversity be a part of that analysis?
Currently, when we look at bookkeeper candidates, we absolutely look at qualifications. We don't look at names, we don't look at where they graduated, we don't look at the year they graduated. We are strictly looking at qualifications. And basically, we have our idea of what those qualifications are, and we want to make sure that they meet those. We typically select, and I would do the same, so that's why I'm using what I've done in the past. We would typically select 6 to 8 candidates that we feel are highly qualified, and we'll interview them. We typically do a second interview with other individuals that would be responsible for working with that person. So an example of that would be a local school bookkeeper. They're closely working with payroll. So we always ensure that someone from payroll is present. And I would do the same thing for this role. The individual that would take my position would work with people in the central office, with local school administrators. So you want to make sure that they have good communication skills, but they're also presenters. So I have to make sure that they're not afraid to stand in front of a crowd. And I guess it's important to know it's not just technical skills, it's mental capacity. So there are a lot of things that you're looking for. And it can be a stressful position. There are a lot of deadlines, a lot of responsibility, especially with Hoover. We have a lot of exposure, a lot of community involvement. I prepare a lot of reports for Freedom of Information Act requests. And sometimes those can be from 1 year. We've had requests for 10 years worth of data. Not always available because of records destruction, but you know, it's very important that you have a lot of skills and not just technology skills and financial.
May I follow up on that? HR has recently provided us some guidelines as it relates to composing committees and vetting individuals, the whole selection process. And you said that we would do those interviews. Tell me who we would be. Who
Well-
would you see representing a committee in that selection process, and how might any guidelines coming out of HR impact this position?
Well, obviously HR would be hugely involved in the position of Director of Accounting. I was giving examples for local schools. So based on probably collaboration with HR, I would ask them who they felt would be the best committee, and then reach out to those individuals. I would think that it would be a representative again from our local school administration. I think it would be someone that represents the board. And when I say the board, I don't necessarily mean one of you have to be present, but always welcome. But I mean someone as a department head within the four walls of this building. It also needs to be a person that they'll work directly with, and that would be me, in the case that I was asked to be CSFO.
That was a supplemental question.
That's right. That's why I wanted to make sure I said the wording right. But yes, the individual needs to be someone that I can trust and is dependable, and again, has a very strong work ethic.
Okay, great.
Ms. McKay, we will have a call board meeting at some point next week.
We're gonna let her have a
Oh,
closing
yes, your closing
statement.
statement. Sorry. Yeah, I jumped ahead of you.
I know, I did that last week.
It's okay. I feel like I've shared a lot about myself and my experiences, so I think what I'd really like to know is, what do you see as a perfect relationship between you and your CSFO? And I think that's very important to know how you feel and see that relationship to be. So all of you can answer, or somebody represent the board, but I would really like to know what your expectations are for the person that sits in this seat.
I can say a couple of things that,
Okay.
that over 5 years almost, it is an understandable budget presentation for one thing, which, I guess accounting is a science, I guess. But from the beginning, understanding a budget that's flashed up on that screen and transmitted to us a couple of days, to be able to actually understand enough to ask intelligent questions, to actually have, to learn something. And that's been the case for the last 3 or 4 years. Extremely important that we get a consolidated budget that we can understand, so we're talking intelligently. We've already gone over it. Collaboration and getting along with the superintendent. And you've already covered what I think is extremely important. Yes, we do hire you, but we rely on the CSFO and we rely on the superintendent to get together, so when we have to make decisions, we're informed enough and understand, and it's been the conversation behind closed doors before it gets to us. Obviously, we never want to break the law, and we know how important it is that from booster clubs to discretionary school spending to camps, athletic camps, science camps, math camps, it's a tremendous responsibility. Reliance on that position is so important to us that we don't have any legal situation.
And if I could follow, oh, sorry.
Well, I
Go
just
ahead,
would
you
throw
go.
in one
Okay,
more
go
thing.
ahead.
I mean, I like to talk about openness and transparency, and I think that's very important. And kind of as the newest board member, you know, the ability for a board member to come to you with questions, because this is a lot to understand when you kind of jump into it, and to be able to you know, have the patience, I guess, to sit down and answer questions that you may have answered over and over and over again, but still to be able to be an educator yourself, and to be able to teach the board members and whoever might come to you about things that they need to know about. Because you're right, accounting, a bit of a science for those of the people who don't understand it. It's tough stuff.
Yeah, and I think for me, you've hit on pretty much everything that I feel is important, which has already really been said: communication, transparency, having an open door policy. Very important, because I mean, we are volunteers, and you know, our time is, you know, we've got people doing all types of different, you know, jobs and so forth, and so our time is limited when we might be able to come to see you. And so just knowing that open door and that flexibility to be able to sit with us and help us when we need it. And I appreciate that, and the whole fact of being transparent and communication is very important. Thank you.
I would say, I like when people are direct. I would like to see that in anybody that would be in your position, just direct. Because that kind of knowledge of all the finances and that kind of, that's a lot. And so I think it's important say what you need, whether it's to Dr. Murphy, whether it's to us, whether it's to other department heads, and rely on people and just be direct with what's important.
Do I have time to respond to some of that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've got
And may I
time.
jump
Oh,
in
yes,
before
ma'am.
that?
I'm sorry, yes, ma'am.
So I think, communication. Superintendent never wants to be left out of the loop and to find things, out otherwise, any more than the CSFO wants to know that I've been holding meetings and it requires money and you didn't even know about it. And so I think both sides of that in terms of you're being at the table anytime there is a matter that involves money and or as soon as I'm having meetings and, ooh, this is about money, we either see if you're available or certainly give you some sort of follow-up. But likewise, I think it's so important that all of us stay in the same loop. Anything that a board member knows, all board members should know. And anything that is requested of us, we should all know. And so I think I would just go back and hang my hat on just the absolute need for communication. And I will say that I'm exceptionally pleased that in this interim process, you and I have found time every week to talk about the business of the school district and the finances, and I'm grateful for your time.
And I'm grateful for your time. I had that as a note that I
Oh,
wanted to
thank you.
mention, so that is absolutely correct. I have enjoyed having that opportunity and the fact that Dr. Murphy sets time aside for us to talk about some of the financial issues, things that I might see coming that she needs to be aware of before it escalates. I do thank you for your time on that. Some of the other things I just wanted to address based on what you shared. I think work sessions are very, very important. It is very difficult for us to prepare a report, put everything we need you to know on that dashboard or in a memo, and expect you to have an understanding of the district's finances to make a recommendation, a motion, and vote in 4 days. And if there are opportunities during the year, quarterly, that we can sit down and talk about finances, I think that would be very beneficial. But knowing too, I do have an open door policy. I think the only time my door is closed is if I have a webinar and there's a sticky on there that says you can still poke your head in, just don't come boldly walking in. But anytime you have questions, in my role now, it doesn't have to be as a CSFO, in my role now, anytime you have questions, pick up the phone and call, because I would much rather you hear it from me or someone in the finance department, from someone in the community. And when we talk about that, that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of this training. We do these support organization trainings and we do the training with our principals in the summer because we want them to have an understanding of what's happening and an understanding of what the laws and regulations are, because they're constantly changing all the time. And if we keep them abreast, then they have an understanding of that. And the perfect example is why we don't use Visa. Once we were able to share that with our support organizations, they were talking at the ballparks and other places. And now it doesn't seem to be an issue at all. So it's very important to communicate. And one of the other ways that we did that, and I didn't share, that I think is one of my strengths along with organization is, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but one of the things I found that the district desperately needed was written policies and procedures. And I can honestly say that I was the author of not only the local school accounting manuals, but the support organization and the central office accounting manuals. So we put those into place that if there ever was a question, people have access to that and they understand what the guidelines are based on where they work and in their particular group. So I thought that was important. And it's just hard to tell you what we want to tell you about accounting and finance and what we do and what we love in 45 minutes. So please understand that. What we do is not done in 45 minutes. And what you see is what you get.
I just said, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
It's all right. What
As
you
far
see
as
is
my
what you get.
expectation,
Yes, sir.
you're a Hoover resident.
Yes, sir.
You've been working in the system for a long time. It is my expectation that you have an absolute line of professionalism. That this position have an absolute line of professionalism. So when you get those calls like, I know Michelle, I can talk to Michelle, we need this, that, and the other. I'm expecting all of the communication and all the collaboration to come into play so that no one can drive a wedge between us and our CSFO. So that's my expectation.
Thank you. And I do have strong relationships with the community and leaders, so thank you for saying that, but no.
You're good on time,
All right.
anything else?
Yeah, anything, No, I'm done.
Say?
I'm done. I'm gonna drink my water.
If I could
Go
make
work.
an observation on what Michelle said about maybe us being thoughtful periodically to have those work sessions specific to finance, because we never want to be surprised by anything that's happening to the school district financially. We don't wanna be surprised when it comes amendment time and go, ooh, wish we'd seen that coming or known more about that. So I do think having those periodic opportunities to kind of gauge the temperature, see where we are, what are we anticipating, hey, some things have changed. Those kinds of conversations would be very beneficial as early as possible and not as late as an amended budget if that happened to be necessary. So I think that's a good suggestion.
And I do think one of my angst is that you have an understanding that the budget is a work in process. I can't control, and I use this as an example in another conversation, I can't control how many times the light switch is turned on and not turned off. Or how many times a bus driver takes leave and we have to have someone from our transportation department drive the bus and we have overtime. I don't have control over that, and every one of those things impacts the bottom line. So again, it's a work in process, and please understand that. That's very important that I relate that information to you. It's not a perfect science, and as much as we might like to be analytical, it's still very difficult to get it just right.
Mr. K, the board will vote on a call meeting next week to consider all the applicants after we've had time to look here. And individually, we can evaluate, and obviously this is a public discussion, so when we come back and whatever action the board chooses to do, it all will be with the public. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for this opportunity. I greatly appreciate it. I really do. Thank you. Well, have a good weekend. Thank you. And Good Friday.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why I'm wearing all black.
I just want to say yes.
Great job.
Happy Easter.
Hey, you too. Enjoy your weekend.
Happy Easter. Thank you.
Oh, no worries.
They're off today.
Oh, yeah.
I know.
They're probably still asleep.
Well, probably. Thank y'all.